We have some incredible speakers lined up for you today. I haven't been able to attend an NGXS presentation before, so I'm really excited about this, Mark. So let me do a quick introduction, and then I'll let you do your thing. All right. So Mark Whitfeld is a software development consultant hailing from the Durban, South Africa. He has been a professional software developer for 20 years and loves open source software, TDD, clean code, and cleanly architected systems. He is at the moment the team lead for the Angular NGXS state management library and has been doing Angular development since the early release candidates. Wow, that takes me back. All right, everybody, welcome Mark Whitfield.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here.
So I'll go ahead and stop sharing so that you can share.
Okay, great. Screen 2. You know, it's really important to press the share button after you choose which screen.
Yeah.
My very first online virtual kind of COVID meetup thing, I chose my screen and did my presentation. 5 minutes in, I was told, Mark, are you sharing anything? So can you see my screen? We've got to ask that. That is how it goes in COVID times.
Yes, we do see it.
Good. That is very good news. It's a good start. Okay, so well, thanks Eric for the introduction and for stealing my thunder, because I was going to introduce myself. So now that you've done half my talk for me, let me do the other half. Okay, so yeah, I've been developing software since 2002. My first website was in 1996. That was before JavaScript, so that dates me quite a bit. Yeah, then it was between Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator, I think, had just come out. But I mean, you had to get that on a stiffy disk to install on your machine. The internet was an experience preceded by this this kind of tone, dial-up internet. It was really good. I remember it took me over an hour to download a one meg file. It was amazing times back then. Anyway, so I'm passionate about open source. I lead the NGXS core team. I'm a big advocate for quality software development practices and things like TDD and human-centered development methodologies. So excuse me if I talk slowly this morning or if I seem out of it. That's because I am. It is 3:15 in the morning for me. I woke up literally half an hour ago. So I'm from South Africa, just outside Durban in South Africa. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you'll see my Twitter handle to the right there. I'm sure Mark Whitfield would like to be followed, but I'm Whitfeld. There's no I in Feld. But let's get going. Cool. So firstly, I would want to establish the following premise. So the most valuable software developers write simple code, testable code, maintainable code, and human code. That last one might sound a little bit funny. Human code is basically where you're considering that there is a human to come to work with your code at some point in the future. It might be yourself in 2 weeks' time. It might be somebody else, but that we're writing for humans. We are writing our software, and our code is probably going to get read a whole lot more times than it's going to be written. It kind of goes without saying. And so it's to consider the human aspect and not just the technical aspect in the software that we develop. Cool, so NGXS. You may or may not have heard of NGXS before. I'm going to rush in here and get quite deep quite soon in terms of more advanced concepts so that you got some good takeaways, but I will run through a a brief introduction in terms of NGXS. Well, it's about half this talk. So NGXS, 4 letters. What is it? Well, it is state management for Angular. So it's something that is similar to what NGRX or Akita or one of those other solutions tries to address. So state management, first of all, it's about handling how we manage data in our software. That kind of goes without saying. It's state management. So what exactly does this do? Well, it helps us to deal with the data that we work with in our application, in any of our applications. So we have data that's maybe coming from the server, coming from input that the user has entered, and we need a strategy to capture cache or combine that data, manipulate that data, send it back to the server. And I come from a background in the beginning of my career where, I did my time in VB6, and then I moved onto .NET and C#, and I spent quite a bit of time on the Microsoft stack. I did WinForms, and what was the thing? Windows presentation, WPF, MVC, all of those sort of things. So I've gone through the life cycles of software over the last 20 years. And when we started in WinForms, it was really fantastic because you would double click a button and you'd type some code behind there, and lo and behold, it would work. So everyone would write their code directly behind their little button click handler, and they would hit their SQL Server database or whatever database that they were using, and they would have SQL statements in there, and it would connect there directly. And everyone was so excited because they could actually make something appear on the screen. But we very soon learned that that was not maintainable. So as things evolved in terms of practices, people started to separate concerns and create different layers for their projects. So they would have their user interface layer and their business logic or domain layer and their database access layer, and different architectures for how you manage your data began to emerge. And these were things like onion architecture, or maybe first of all started with 3-tier or n-tier architecture, onion architecture, clean architecture, and all of these different things eventually leading to kind of distributed architecture and those sort of things. Why did I talk about all of that when I'm talking about NGXS? We're talking front end. We're talking about that sort of stuff. Well, I saw the exact same thing happen with AngularJS. I think that was really the start of SPAs. Yes, we did stuff in Knockout, but that was more just we got excited about changing computed properties. So why am I talking about this? Because I saw the exact same thing happen in Angular land, because everybody put all their code behind their components, and it made for something that was untestable and something that was just maintainability and reuse and all these sort of things were just really not considered. And the developer coming along after you was not considered. Everyone was excited about throwing out forms and getting things to work straight away. So that's kind of where we've been in Angular. And what I've seen is state management has come in as a pattern and a way that we can actually start to control how we manage the data in our application. So it actually gives a place for your logic and your the meat behind your front-end application to live, and for something to coordinate. Managing state, which is something that you have to do whether you like it or not. We all work with state management. You might just be custom rolling it behind every service that you're doing. You might be doing behavior subject as a service. You might be doing all these different things. The fact is, you have got to figure out how to do caching. You've got to figure out how to combine this data, how to create a consistent experience for your user, and all those sort of things. in the way that you manage data. So that's where state management comes in. It helps you to manage those concerns. So NGXS and many of the other Redux style patterns, they follow this command query responsibility segregation sort of pattern, CQRS, where you decouple your reads from your writes in your application. And then also, in particular, NGXS, it leverages things that are very familiar for Angular developers, things like decorators, classes, dependency injection. It doesn't feel like you're stepping into a different world of functional stuff and confusing observables and streams and all that when you're doing your state management. It feels very natural for Angular. Good old water break. Okay, so so that at a very high level is NGXS and what problem it solves and how it's slightly different, but we'll get into that now. So we have our components in our application, we have our state in our application, and in order to make changes to our state and communicate with our state, we use actions, and in order to ask questions of our state and get information into our components, we use selectors. So very typical sort of pattern. So with NGXS, an action is a class. So it represents a message or an event or a command. So for example, load recipes, you'll see there static type recipes, load recipes. That's really just a safe or a nice description for you to be able to refer to this, some sort of unique identifier for this particular type of action. So this, in this case, represents a command, load recipes, or a message revealing my intent. I would like to load the recipes. And in NGXS, we use classes here. We don't use these action creators and all those sort of things because I go back to old JavaScript days. A class is just a constructor function. So guess what? There you have your action creator. It's called class, and it's a constructor on the class. So if you want to create your action, you would just new up your load recipes class, and you'd pass through some sort of payload. So in that case, we've got a recipe type, which is a string, and it's nice old TypeScript public, becomes a public property of our action. And I mean, we also don't need to, so we've got our type safety built in there. Our type knows about its action type, and we don't need any special type and payload properties or anything like that. We can name the properties whatever we like. It's quite a nice thing for developer ergonomics. And then the other thing is that actions are multicast. And so they also have a life cycle, as I mentioned there. So multicast is basically I dispatch an action, and then any state in my application that's currently loaded will be able to respond to that action. And they have a life cycle. And this is where it's quite different to NGRX. In NGXS, your action has a life cycle of it's dispatched or it's completed. So, and completion can be successful completion, error, or cancellation. So those are very unfamiliar terms. Okay, what does that look like? We'll get into that now. Great. Then we have our state. So if you have a look at the code example there, our state, it's a class, which is great. And it has a decorator at the top. It says state. The model that this stores is a recipe state model. That's an interface that I've declared in my code. The name of my state is recipes, and it's got some default value for the recipe state model. So the default is that the items array is blank. Now you'll see the recipe state is injectable, so therefore it can inject services for it to interact with. So you can see I'm injecting my API there. So the conceptual model in NGXS what's very interesting is when you start using NGXS, or one of the things I noticed when I started using NGXS is that you think, you start to think feature-wise, or kind of domain-wise. You think kind of more locally, and I don't want to say local because people think about component state, but you think in a smaller scope than thinking about my global state. With NGRX, I was always thinking about where I've got a reducer, and then this is where I'm putting it into my global state and all of that sort of stuff. In NGXS, you don't think about that. You actually just, you give your state a name, and then that's the last time you actually think about global state. So it feels very focused, very, very domain specific, and it represents a subset of your application's data. So you will have many of these different state classes, and they can be as small as you like. I wouldn't say that they can be as big as you like, because that's probably a bit of a code smell. Rather make them smaller. But yes, they could be as big as you like. Just don't make application state. It's just no. You've probably gone the wrong direction. So it has a model, and it knows what model it uses to store that data. And then it also defines hooks for how we handle actions within the state. Let me show you one of those hooks. So for example, our action that we had before, load recipes. So that code that you see there, that is a function within that recipe state class that you declare. So as you can see, the function is called load recipes. I could call it Bob. It doesn't have any special value there, because the action decorator is telling it that it is going to respond to that action. So and then you'll see there's the first parameter is consistently, it's the context. I've actually got an alias type there, but it's actually a state context of type T, where T is recipe state model. So our state context is something that we use to interact with our state. And then we have our action, which was the actual instance that we dispatched. So we can access data on that. In this case, I'm not actually doing anything with that. But if you notice here, I'm doing something. I'm connecting to an API. I'm awaiting that async await. This is crazy. This is crazy talk. And then I get my data from my API, and then I patch that onto my state. So if you're a Redux purist, the first thing you would be thinking is, this is terrible. He's mixing mutations and side effects together. Well, I'm happy to, because guess what? I'm going to design software for humans. So yes, we can be all purist, but the fact is that I can give this to a junior developer. Junior developer can read this code and go, yeah, I know what's going on there. That makes sense. So we very much focus on developer ergonomics to make sure that this code is readable, simple, maintainable. As you can see, I'm using async await here. I could be using my observable if I wanted to. And for example, I could be patching before my load to say loading is true, and then afterwards I say loading is false, and here are the items, etc., etc. So, and you can potentially await something, do something, wait something else. You can do optimistic updates. There are patterns for those sort of things, and so that's where this starts to feel a little bit different. I haven't just got this plain old reducer or this effects that just feels like I've entered this world of observable pain, where you switch map, you can't cat maps, brother-in-laws, cousins, merge maps, exhaust map. And if you know what all of those mean, then I feel for you. I've gone through that pain as well. So okay, I'm getting distracted here, and I'm blabbering on. Okay, so we can inject the Angular services to handle our side effects directly like that, which is really, really great. And asynchronous work and all of that sort of stuff. It's a first class it's a first class. There's first class support for it in NGXS. So for example, that load recipe state, because this handler has an async and await, which in the end returns a promise, or if this handler was to return an observable, my load recipes action lifecycle only completes once all of this processing has finished. So once that promise or any other handlers, once their promises complete or a returned observable completes, then load recipes is considered to have completed. The other thing that you'll note there is I've got load recipes. I've not got the trinity of actions that you'll often see in these applications. I haven't got load X complete, load X failed, that sort of stuff. I've just got one action, and I use it, and I do stuff, and I get on with my job and delivering awesome software. So you don't need to have all these different separate actions that you've got to declare and put in to handle the different phases and life cycle of an action. It's just first class support for this sort of stuff. Okay, I did lots of talking. Let's carry on. Okay, so the next bit is selectors. So it represents a query or a question that you want to ask of your state. It is a pure function, so it's easy to test. Selectors in NGXS are composable, and the one last thing is that they are memoized, so very similar to most Redux type implementations, is that if you don't know what memoize is, it comes from kind of, well, I guess mathematics, but functional concepts. But basically, if the function is run again with the exact same inputs, it will not be executed. It'll just return its previous output for that same input. So if sorted items selector is called again, and it has the exact same reference array of recipes that is being passed in again that it did last time, it will return its same result last time. It won't redo the sort. It'll just repeat that same result. So it's basically just caching the output based on its arguments. So the other thing that you'll notice here is the selector. So, okay, I've got the keyword static in front of there, so that could be declared on that state class. It could actually be declared on any class you like. That doesn't even need to be injectable because they're pure. So you shouldn't be injecting services into your selectors. But as you can see, that function is pure. So if I don't know about my global state. My function is not taking in state globally and then returning some new value from that. In other Redux implementations, every single function has the same signature where it takes in your global state and then returns some sort of value. In NGXS, you just add the selector decorator. It basically tells you what selector it needs to use. So recipe state.items is a selector from the recipe state. It just says, hey, put the value from that selector into that parameter in my selector, and let's get going with building our application. So that is what selectors look like in NGXS. Okay. So the next thing is that on our component side, collaborating with the state is quite straightforward. So we've got, so you'll see that we've got a @select decorator once again. So just like you're familiar with for Angular components, you've got an input decorator or an output decorator or any of that sort of stuff. We've got a select decorator. So that basically binds that property to that. Sorry. Thanks for pointing out the typo. I haven't seen it. Thanks a lot. So that binds that selector to that property. So that property will contain that observable. In the case of TypeScript being strict mode, you have to do recipes $! To basically tell TypeScript, yes, don't worry, it is going to be initialized. You can inject a store, and from that store you can select. You can also go .dispatch, and that in our case there, select recipe, it is dispatching a new select recipe action, which is passing through a recipe name. So this is how we do our connecting of our component to our store. And in the applications that I build, my goal is to minimize the amount of code that I have in my component. So we aim for minimum code behind, minimal RxJS complexity. So use the async pipe. So I've written very large applications without subscribing once, without doing any combined latest, without adding code that's going to confuse me later. It's very simple interactions using these mechanisms, and it supports on push and all of that sort of stuff. By the way, I just want to mention back here in your action, we use async await. It's absolutely safe to use async await because right here, we're actually outside of zones. So within our state, we're outside of zones. If you have zones enabled, it re-enters zones through the selection pipelines and whatever other kind of ways that you interact with your state. So there's no worries about zones or triggering unnecessary change detections or those sort of things when using NGXS. Okay, and then lastly, NGXS has many useful plugins. So when NGXS came out, I was one of those people. Austin McDaniel released it in March of 2018. I threw myself into the project, and a couple of months later, I was leading the team. But there were many other people that got involved very much straight away and just added this incredible ecosystem of plugins. So there's a plugin for binding state to a form, for binding it to storage, to the router. I'd say router in my country, but router. Logging to the console, connecting to Firebase, connecting with your Redux dev tools. The Redux dev tools, it's not quite perfect because we're not a pure Redux approach. But for those that like to use the dev tools, it works really well. And there's many other very useful plugins. We even have a labs area where people are working on more kind of experimental approaches with plugins. Okay, so that was the introduction. How am I doing? Great. Yeah, I see that hand at the back. No, I'll answer your question later. It's fine. Okay. This is so awkward. I hate not being able to see the audience, but anyway. Okay, so simple state smart selectors. This is what my talk is about. So in our application, typically, conceptually, we have some state, and then we're going to be showing a couple of different views, or I like to call them projections of my state. So in this case, for example, state X, state Y, view A is showing something about state Y, but then view B is maybe bringing parts of those two bits of state together and showing that and letting the user maybe search or do something around that. And so there's different combinations of this data that we render into our views. So at a high level, I advocate for keeping your state as simple as possible and adding the smarts of your application into your selectors. So these are the principles. So store raw data in your state. So in whatever form it comes, captured input, store that in your state. Obviously, if it does make sense to store it globally, don't just whack everything into state because it's what everyone's doing. So put your captured input in its raw form in the state, your whatever came from the server, from API calls, those sort of things, put that straight into the state. Don't transform, just put it in there. Obviously, sometimes you need to do transforms. For example, with Firebase, often you'll get your Firebase document, but it doesn't have the ID on it. So yes, you might do a transform to add the ID to the document that was loaded. But other than that, just put them into your state as raw as possible. And then create classes for composing selectors. These, I like to call them query classes, but they're called, many people call them selector classes. In our docs, I think they're referred to as meta selectors, but basically those are selectors put onto classes that are other than state classes. And then also create view specific selectors. So selectors representing almost your view models. So what does view B need? Let's make a selector that massages the data into the shape that view B needs. And these selectors would be composed from more general purpose, feature specific, domain specific selectors. What I do want to mention, just quickly, I'll go back. On our selector there, you see that our we can pass an array. So you can pass in multiple selectors as multiple properties of this function. So composing your selectors is just a case of dealing with those multiple properties. So it might have been obvious, but I did want to just state it. So that's how you compose your selectors together. Okay, so let's work with an example. So the NGXS diner or restaurant or cafe. So we've got orders and we've got recipes, and we've got a couple of different views of this. So there's ordering, so placing the orders, the list of recipes, the kitchen, the stock room. So the restaurant receives orders for tables, the kitchen prepares orders, and the stock room supplies ingredients to the kitchen. Cool. So enough talk. Show me some code. So let me just make sure I get this right without bombing out my slideshow. There we go. Look at that. That's some code, but you probably can't read that. So let's just let's supersize it. Take us to McDonald's. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be advertising. Okay, so here's my application. So I've got my recipes, okay, layout, restaurant, stock, and kitchen. So let's have a look at our recipe state. So I like to do this sort of aliasing local state context of type recipe state model. It's just so that I don't have to keep on remembering that, and copy pasta can work for me if I'm copying some from somewhere else. So here's my recipe state, text in the service. There's a selector. So that selector basically just exposes the items from the state. This one in particular takes the items and sorts them to create my sorted item selector. We've got NGXS on init, so I can maybe on initialization, I can dispatch my load recipes action, and there's my action that I've seen before. So within here, you'll see my models. I've got my recipe data model, got my recipe API service. It just gets it from an API. And here's my state. There's my actions, so load recipes. I could even not declare the constructor if I wanted to, because there's no payload for this. And then you'll see here on the module, NGXS module.for feature. So NGXS fully supports lazy loaded modules. So those states can come to the party later on when their concerns are being handled. In this case, everything is eagerly loaded. So this is my recipes domain. I don't have a view or user interface in particular for my recipes domain in this example. So this example project, I knocked up in about 4 hours in preparation for the first time that I did this talk. It is available on GitHub. I will post these links afterwards. There we go. It is available on GitHub at my name, Mark Whitfeld, /NGXS Diner. And then obviously you can have a look at it. StackBlitz. I work with that team, really awesome team, awesome company, rocking front-end dev. Okay, so this So this is the example project. So that's my recipe state, that's great. So let's try and find some code in this application. Now, before I do that, so here's the code. I like to do these feature modules like that. But let's look at what this application looks like and feels like to use. So we have a couple of tables. My superior design skills end at material or whatever is given to me. So forgive how this looks. So we've got a couple of tables, and so let's open up this table, and here we go. Let's order someone wants a curried beef stew. Someone else wants one of those. Someone wants mushrooms, pate, that thing. Apparently, it's amazing Greek dessert. Cool. Someone's gonna have the pizza. Yes, lots of pizza orders. Okay, no, people are actually deciding to be a little bit more healthy. So, but wait, let's get some more liver pate there, because you can't have enough liver pate, hey? Chickens giving their livers. Okay, so so here's the order for this table, and so you'll note that we have one pizza there. Let me go to the second table, and this is just a whole lot of people want these pizzas. There we go. We've got a pizza ordering table there. So we've got two tables that have placed orders. So now let's go, and I go to my kitchen. Lo and behold, there's my production schedule. So it tells me how many of each things that the kitchen needs to order. But someone needs to go to the stock room to get all those ingredients. So let's go to the required stock screen. So this basically tells me how much of all of those ingredients do I need to fulfill all of those orders. So it's an aggregation of the data over all those recipes. What are the ingredients? Bring them together. We need 6 eggs, etc., and tablespoon of salt. Yeah. So basically all that information, and there's some things that we need to get from our Nana. Because JavaScript thinks that no number is a Nana. Anyway, I can hear you all laughing right now in my head, awkwardly, in silence. Okay, so this is the NGXS diner. It is revolutionary. This is going to rock the restaurant world. And I wrote that in 4 hours. So let's have a look. So you saw my recipes. Let's have a look and see what's happening in these components. So I've got my restaurant components. Okay, cool. So I've got, there we go. Here's the pages. So the pages are the things that are routed to. Cool. So there's my page, and it has the tables view in it. There's got my component. Oh, okay. There's not much there. Okay, cool. So I've got a selector, and I've got an async pipe, which is great. So I'm just getting my view model and rendering my view model. So let's try and find all this code. No, it's not in my tables view component. Okay, so there's some HTML. There we go. So I do have my table card, which allows me to display a table. And this is this card here. If I'll just go to restaurant. So this is this card here. It represents the table. Cool. So let's have a look. This has got a couple of functions on it where we can dispatch some actions. So this is just basically dispatching actions and using input that has been given in our table view. Yeah, what are we doing here? We've just got we've got a selector. So in this case, I'll just show you there's store.select, which is another way to select some data into your component. Okay. And so this is actually using what's known as a dynamic selector, but you'll have to look into our docs for what that's about. And we're dispatching some actions. So not much is actually going on here in terms of our components. So where's the code? So let's have a look. In our state, we've got our table state. So our tables, it's loading our list of tables from an API, and it's exposing our tables as a list of sorted items. We've got our order state, and we've got, so our actions are, for example, open table, close table, edit table order, add table choice, remove table choice. When you click that plus and minus, that's just the add and the remove. And then, in our order state, we respond to open table, close table, all of those different things. And you'll see here, we go in context.set state, and NGXS has built-in things called state operators, which are things that basically, you don't have to do as much with the spread operator. It's basically declarative ways of manipulating your state, which is really great. In this case, I'm patching my state, that particular table name. Then I'm patching the order that's under that table. And in the choices on that order, I'm removing an item that matches this. And in this case up here, I'm inserting an item. So it's a declarative way to manipulate your state. Cool. So here's the crux of what I'm talking about in my talk is you create these selectors that have kind of more high level logic in your application. So get all ordered items count map. So this is a map that tells me how many items of each order I've ordered. Get ordered recipes. So this is aggregating essentially the tables, I think so. And then this is aggregating all of those orders from the tables to recipes. And then if we have a look here, view models. I have these view model queries. As you can see, these are just classes. They're not injectable. They're just kind of housing these selectors. So get view model for table. So this is a view model for a specific table. So this is the dynamic, or this is the lazy selector. So you pass to a table name. So your selector gives you a function. That function, you tell it this is the table name. It'll give you the orders for that table and give you a view model. And that view model is tailored exactly for what that view needs. So as you can see in my view model, I've got ordered and not ordered on my view model. And if we have a look here, ordered and not ordered. That's essentially what this is giving me. So I use my selector to shape my data to exactly what that view needs. So I'll go through the rest of my application quickly because I know we're coming up to time soon. So in my kitchen, I have some pages. Great, not much code there. Let's have a look at my orders list. Not much code there either. Mark, I know the pattern that you're doing now. So let's go to the view model. There we go. Here's my selector. There wasn't too much that I needed to do to manipulate that general purpose domain specific selector into the shape that I need. But I still had to do some stuff to do the counting for the kitchen. And then let's have a look at our stock room. So let's go to our stock room. So here's our ingredients query for our stock room. This is quite a meaty selector. This is doing all the kind of aggregating over all the ingredients for each recipe, depending on the quantity that's been ordered and the unit and all that sort of stuff for the ingredient and aggregating that. So this is more of kind of a domain level query. So this is generally useful. It happens to be very similar to what my view model needs. But in the case of my view model, I actually just create a view model that is ingredient orders. And there could be some arbitrary data on there, like maybe you have a filter, maybe you have something else like that, that you potentially combining in order to filter down your ingredient orders or something. So anything that your view arbitrarily needs can just be added to this model, and you don't have to worry about the impact across the rest of the application. Okay, so and that is the application. So I've gone through this whole thing, and you might have thought, oh, where's the code? That application felt like it did a lot of stuff, but there's not much code here. And And that to me is one of the big benefits of state management. When you use it correctly, you get a very, very clean solution, something that's very obvious and very testable. Most of our application code and logic is sitting in our selectors, which are pure functions and extremely testable. So enough code now. Let's get back to what did we just learn from this? So I'll remind you the principles were store raw data in the state and as stored as in a raw form as possible. So I fetch from the API, put it in the state, and I moved on. My selected table, all of that sort of stuff. Let me just show you very quickly. In our restaurant, let's have a look at so table state, is it there? I actually don't have a concept of a selected table because that's just kind of implied by the dialogues context. Cool. So these are the principles: store raw data in your state, compose selectors, and create these kind of domain level queries or these view model queries. I cannot emphasize enough how amazing these view model queries are, because it allows you to just tailor very specifically to what that page needs. And you don't get confused by combined latest, or should I pipe to a combined latest, or like there's all that confusion that can happen when you get to observables and RxJS. RxJS is amazing, but keep it to the very complex code. Don't let it permeate your entire code base. You want junior developers to be able to maintain this code and not have to hire really senior developers to work on the simplest things in your code base. Cool. So I am available for questions, but it depends on how things are structured in this meetup. I know that I've run the course of time for my talk. I will post the link to the GitHub and everything in the chat. And if you do want to follow NGXS on Twitter, so it's at NGXS store. If you follow NGXS, it's some person from Asia that talks Chinese. So you probably won't get much there on NGXS. So that is that. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, Mark.
Sorry if it was rushed. Cool.
No, that's good. Hey, we got a bunch of chats. Just to summarize it for you, a lot of folks communicating to you via chat about this, that, and the other. Some of them asking questions. We got 10 Q&As. 4 have been answered. So we don't really have too much time, but if you'd like to pick a couple of the Q&As, that would be fantastic. Sorry, everyone. I just want to make sure we give Keerti enough time for his part as well.
Cool. Any particular questions, Eric? I'm just looking at the chat for the first time.
I saw that there was one that was, how do you handle effects? I thought you might want to put a kind of an exclamation mark on that one.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you handle effects? There's no special place for effects. You can handle effects directly in. Let me share my screen again, and I'll show you the bit of code that's the equivalent of effects. Okay. Slide. That's the noise your keyboard makes when you do. There we go. There's my effects. So if you have a look here, in my action handler, basically this. Why don't I actually show you in the code? That's probably better. So this is my go to table state. So there's my effect. So if I was persisting to a server, let's just in this app, it's useless because nothing actually goes to server. So you can do your side effects within your action handlers, and it is not pure Redux where they want to separate your effects and your reducers. If you want to do that, you are welcome to do that. So you could have load tables, completed or whatever, and you can separate these things out if you really want to. And then context also has a dot dispatch, and then you tables completed, data dot whatever it was, send the data through. So you could separate your side effects, but they don't have a different mechanism. That it is just something that happens in response to an action, and in response to an action, you can update your state, and you can do side effects. You can do a mix of the two if you want to. Generally, I found that very strict paradigm, the only real benefit is the purity of how it comes in your dev tools and being able to time travel. In all my time of doing NGXS development, I have not needed to open up the Redux dev tools and do time travel. It's my application is just simple enough to reason about. I don't have to I don't have to use those complex or those fancy debugging techniques. I've never needed to do that, and I've built some extremely complex applications. But the localized view just makes things very easy to reason about, easy to test, all of that sort of stuff. So I hope that answers your question in terms of side effects.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Mark.
Cool.
All right, everybody give it up for Mark Whitfeld. And don't forget to follow him on Twitter and check out NGXS. And I've pasted, I'll paste it again just in case, because somebody's saying it's hard to copy from chat or it's not possible. But it's at github.com/Mark Whitfeld. And then you can just find /NGXS-Diner in his repos, or you can just type it in. Thanks again, Mark. And we really appreciate you coming in the middle of the night to share all this awesome info with us. Also,
everyone, and my DMs are open on Twitter, so please go ahead and ping me. Don't be afraid to ask me any questions on Twitter. Sorry, I will mention that we do have a very active Slack community. If you go to ngxs.io, which is where our docs are found, or the GitHub repository, you can go ahead and follow the Slack link there. We've got, I think, 1,500 to 2,000 people on the Slack right now. So very active community. So cool.
Also, we got a bunch of people join just because you were saying it felt awkward not being able to see people. So thank you to our wonderful
thank you very much
attendees for doing that too. Yeah. All right. Well, let me introduce Keerti, and I'll take over the screen real quick. Open my notes. So, Keerti, I know that you've already written your bio. I'd like to do an introduction for you, but I see that you've written it really nicely for me. And so if I do read it, it would have to be me changing it from first person to third person. So I'm like, maybe this time I'll ask Keerti if he wants to introduce himself. I'm usually very persistent about this, but you wrote it very well in first person, and I don't want to butcher it. So what do you say? Do you want me to introduce you, or would you do it yourself?
I'm okay the way. Considering the time, let me jump in. Maybe I can take the screen, and yeah, I have an introduction slide. I'll probably spend 30 seconds on it.
Sounds good. And also, we can go to 7:50 for yours so that you have the full 35 minutes and 5 minutes of QA, okay?
Sure. Yep. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Let me take out the screen share. Hope everyone can see my screen and also hear me okay? All right, yeah.
It looks good and you sound great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eric. Let me jump in on the topic. Here, the topic of the session is building offline applications with Angular.
Hey, Keerti,
so just
I'm sorry to interrupt, but there does seem to be some kind of feedback.
Okay.
Talking. I don't know if there's a second microphone or something.
Is it still there? You still hear any disturbance?
I do not. You're good now. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I think somebody honking outside that must have caused it. Yeah, anyways. So yeah, the topic of the session is building offline applications with Angular. I just want to set some context. I will definitely go over the introduction as well. Traditionally, when we look at web applications, couple of decades back, but 2003, that's when I started my career. I started building as a developer trainee, few web applications. So those days, network connectivity was taken for granted, right? Rightfully so, because most of the applications were open on desktop and laptops, which are either wired, connected to the network, or on a pretty safe Wi-Fi network, which means people don't have to really worry about what happens if they lose connectivity. But it has changed quite a bit now. So I was just thinking about this very recently. I had this experience. Most of you would have downloaded ebooks. So a lot of mainstream organizations, including NGINX, Microsoft, some of these, they give you a form. You fill up a form, your name, address, maybe email, phone number. There are 6 to 8 fields. You fill in all that information. I was doing it on the phone. I submitted. Boom. There is a glitch on the connectivity. I lost connection. Few seconds later, I got the connectivity back, but the data that I just filled in was pretty much lost. I have to redo the same thing. As you can imagine, typing in on a mobile phone is going to be pretty, it's not going to be a good user experience. So these are mainstream scenarios today. Few years back, this is probably not such a mainstream scenario. Even the web applications today have to cater to loss of connectivity, momentary loss of connectivity, and which could in turn cause bad user experience, loss of data. Imagine this being an e-commerce application. Somebody is trying to buy something, they pretty much lost the user or lost the purchase. So those are the scenarios we're trying to tackle with this session. So with that in context, let me jump in. Here is my quick introduction slide. I've been, as I mentioned, I've started web development back in 2003. I've done development on a variety of projects, small, medium, large scale applications. I've done consulting. I've provided solutioning for last 6 to 8 years approximately. I've been on front-end development largely. I've also authored a couple of books so far, both of them on Angular. I work for Cognizant. I work as a principal architect. We also have the social media and my website out there. And anyone wants to reach out to me, follow me or DM me, I will try to revert as soon as I can. There's a quick introduction about myself. Let me jump in. These are the topics I wanted to cover. Progressive web apps, installable applications. We wanted to showcase how easy it is to start with an Angular application and easily turn it into an installable web app, be it on a mobile device, be it on a desktop. You should be fairly easily be able to install it and launch it directly off the desktop instead of remembering the URL, typing in the URL. Yeah, that kind of a thing. And then the service worker, I'll give an introduction to service worker. We will showcase few features of service worker in a quick demo. You also want to get into IndexedDB implementation towards the end. So quick agenda for us to get into. Yeah, so let me actually jump in. Let me move my code here. I just want to showcase this particular item. Hope you see my code window overlaid on the presentation. All right, yeah. So I have a quick application running here. I'll just do and start. It's pretty much, I did ng-new sample application, sample one, pretty much basic application. I made few changes to the app component so that it's not the bare bone or the out of box generated code. Let me go back to the browser window.
Hey, Keerti, we have a request from someone, an attendee, to increase the font of your code when you go back there. If that,
Sure,
if
will
you
do.
can do that. Thanks.
Yeah, will do. Just trying to move the zoom. Yeah, okay. So let me come here. It's pretty much bare bone application, not much in it. So you want to turn this in. We'll see how easy it is for us to really make it, add a service worker and make it installable application. I'll just use, this is an Angular schematic. As part of, I'll increase the code size, hopefully. Is this better?
Yeah, we got a confirmation.
Oh, sounds good. So all I did, we have a bare bone Angular application. I added PWA schematic to it. We'll give it a sec for it to finish installation.
I like this app, by the way. It's a good app.
Which one?
It says Angular Community Meetup on it. So
yeah, got you. Yeah. So what I will do, instead of running yarn start, let me run a build on it. I will explain why we do this instead of doing a simple ng serve with the start. This should create a dist folder here. It should generate the build. This is going to do because it didn't mention any configuration like watch. It will do a production build. I'll give it one more second. Yeah. So now I would use HTTP server instead of Webpack. Instead of running this application on Webpack, how ng serve or Angular, the out-of-box thing that comes out of Angular CLI does. Run it on port 8081. Dist has sample1 inside. So I will say sample1. This is where we are running the HTTP server. HTTP server has started. This is my, yeah. So I hard reloaded. We have the same application running, this time with a production build, and you see the little install sample button show up. Click on it. You see the default configuration, default application name, some details about it. We can click install and it will go ahead and install the application for us. The same thing would happen on an Android phone or an iPhone. We would be able to install it so that for an easy launch from the device. So what really happened when we added this schematic Angular PWA? It added a couple of configuration, among other things, it added a couple of configuration. Let's focus on this particular configuration, web manifest. So this is the information we are looking at when we ran the build. So say community, provide a short name as well. If it is too large, and if they are especially on phones, when you can't really see the entire large text, that's when the short name is useful. But anyways, I'll go ahead and make this change. I could also do something real quick. Eric might like it. A bunch of icons. These are precise to the requirement for a PWA application, progressive web app. Come back here, go to assets. I will override these icons, the default Angular icons. There are this thing here. Replace all of them. Yeah, we'll run the build again. Hopefully this finishes quickly. Start the HTTP server, come back to Chrome, hard reloaded, demo guts are on my side. You should see the change reflected. You would also see, if I go ahead and install it now, you see the application launching. We don't need the dev tools. Imagine the entire web application in its own window. You could see the shortcut. This is on a desktop or a laptop machine. Of course, the same thing would happen on a mobile device as well, where it's going to be more useful. It's very in a quick 5-minute action. We pretty much have this application installable. There's a pretty much low-hanging fruit for us building Angular applications, web applications in general. So let me go back to my slide deck. Yeah, so this is pretty much what I'm summarizing here. I provided a link when you have access to, when you look at the slide deck, you could have a look at this PWA builder, access to the link as well. You could generate the icons, any icon you would have, you could generate it to various sizes. This is one tool, you could use any tool for that matter. Otherwise, I gave a quick, I'll not walk through each of them, but just a quick summary of what the manifest file largely contains, the kind of information it would have, and yeah, and what is the use of each of these fields. We have used name, short name, display. There are few options here, standalone, and that is the default. You could go full screen, minimal UI, browser. You would pretty much open large browser window and everything in it, and like a typical web application, even that is possible. Icons, of course, and you can define the scope. You don't want the entire application to be your installable app and part of it. You could do that, and start URL. Where do you have your index.html? That's pretty much what the start URL is talking about. All right, so moving on. Hope there are. I could probably come back to the questions towards the end if there are any questions. Is there a reason for HTTP server? Yeah, I mentioned I wanted to talk about it a little bit. So when I run this on, let me go back to this application. We have the dev tools on the side. Chrome dev tools are pretty useful. These are pretty powerful. As you know, it's a powerful tool. If I go to the manifest, then I have this stopped. Let me start it again. So maybe try it in a new window. Yeah, so you could click on the manifest and they'll give you warnings, errors, whatnot. So if I show you a little bit of detail, when we add the schematic, one of the important actions that the schematic is doing for us out of box is if I go to the app module.ts. So it is registering the service worker for us. I haven't really talked about it, but this is the service worker script that it is registering for us. And it runs on a production build. That is one aspect. And the second aspect being the serve command, Angular CLI serve command out of box is not supporting PWA yet. I've seen a GitHub issue on it. I think in future versions, but I think I'm not running the latest anyways. I'm not on 13. I think I'm on 12 at this point. But yeah, even if you, in future versions of Angular, CLI might support this out of box. For the moment, we need production build. You could change this. I could make this true, a hard-coded value true, and you would pretty much build the service worker. But the Webpack that Angular CLI uses underneath wouldn't really support the service worker. That's the reason I have to run it on HTTP server. That's what Angular documentation is recommending as well. That's that. Which ones are models? I think that was an old question. Sorry about it. moving on, I wanted to talk about service workers now. Yeah, service workers are natively supported by the browsers. This has been there for a few years now. Service workers bridge the gap between apps and web applications. As we know, because of the iOS, largely the app ecosystem has taken the application development by a stop. You have a lot of apps built. One of the advantages apps gives us is the application is installed on your device. The data, it is easy to save the data. Imagine Twitter application. You would have opened the Twitter this morning. You lost connectivity somewhere in the afternoon. When you're not connected to internet, let's say you opened the Twitter. You opened Twitter, you would see all the previous tweets at least. It's not that you would see a page can't be displayed kind of a message, rather the cached tweets would show up. You still have something to interact with. That is a no-brainer for an app, but for a web application, that hasn't been the case. So service worker largely addresses that problem. You could look at service worker. In fact, service worker is a proxy between the web application and the network resource, be it a HTTP service. You largely get calls. So we can make a decision as a web app. We can write code to use service worker as needed. The Angular PWA schematic helps us provide certain out-of-box features, which would, as we have seen, it added a manifest file that showed the install button on top. Similar to that, it also does more things in terms of caching the application. The application is once installed, even if you don't have access to the data, it's not going to be a page can't be displayed kind of a message when you lose connectivity. Rather, you would see a proper application launch. You can choose to cache few data calls and show that data. The control is with us. And sometimes in transactional systems, it's not a good idea. Twitter, of course, tweets can be cached and shown, but there are few systems it's not a good idea to show stale data. So depending on our configurations, some service calls could be cached, some others are always fresh, obtained from the services. So in a nutshell, it is a proxy between our web application and the network resource. We can decide what can come from cache, what comes from the network resource. So it's a quick introduction to service worker. So one of the highlights here is it decreases dependency on the network. There are going to be scenarios where you could pretty much cache everything, or at least few of the service calls, and show that data even when you're offline. I mean, you can go to the network only when it's absolutely needed. That is possible with service worker. That's one point I wanted to mention. So I can demonstrate the same thing for our application. I could go back to the dev tools. I'm running HTTP server. Yeah. Let me open the dev tools for this. So Chrome again has this feature where I can throttle this offline. I'll go ahead and refresh. We don't have service calls, obviously, in this application at this point. It's pretty much the application skeleton. It is the applications, it is the scripts, it is the images, it is the CSS. That's pretty much what we have here. So I went offline. I throttled it offline. I refreshed the page. You see the resources are rendered from the service worker. Eventually, you will see a red dot. This is the service worker configuration. Last time when I mentioned 2 configuration files were added among many other things that the schematic did for us. One of them is the service worker configuration, and the other one we looked at, which is the web manifest file, which let us install the application first. So yeah, talking about this point, now the application is installed, the application scripts and everything is on the device. Not yet data. We'll also look at data example. Yeah, I mean, just wanted to talk about, so far, when we look at a web application, you have something deployed on a server or a CDN. It is replicated to various CDN. And imagine there is an upgrade. There is a new installation deployment happened overnight. A user came in and launched the application. What would happen? It goes to the web server, retrieves the resources, and shows the new application automatically. That is one of the advantages with web applications, right? Imagine you being an app developer. If there is an update, you would have to push all the updates to the individual devices. Whereas on the other side, web applications are easy to deploy the new upgrades and new versions, and you readily have access to the new application. This feature of Service Worker, now we are installing it on the devices. This becomes more like an app, which means we would have to be able to install upgrades to the device. We would have our code or the browsers have to identify there is a new version of the application available, and it would have to install it. That need to happen. So that is where this life cycle comes into picture. For the first time around, browser registers a Service Worker. I don't know if you played with Service Worker already. If not, you would have, if you just go to your dev tools and Service Workers and see all registrations link here, or you can directly type in Service Worker internals. You would see there are a bunch of Service Workers already. You could see these are a few demos on my side, but there is Angular IO uses Service Worker, Google Calendar uses Service Worker. There are a few other applications, Code Sandbox uses Service Worker. So there are quite a few Service Workers. Many applications use of it. That comes from this registration activity. First time around, it registers with the browser, it installs it, and it activates it. Either you would terminate it if you're not using it for a really long time, then it goes into terminated status. If the installation fails, it let him to install it next time around. But as and when you launch the website, you would do a fetch. As far as I've seen, Service Workers don't use XHR. They use the fetch request. Fetch is the modern way of retrieving the data from the servers. So the fetch, you could use cache and obtain the resource. This is the life cycle. So when you do an install, if there is an upgrade identified, and let's say you're doing an install and there is a problem, let's imagine a particular resource, it was not able, the browser is not able to download it. You would either install the entire application or nothing at all. I mean, you would not have partial installs from their bugs in the application, which can't be foreseen. That kind of a scenario we would not get into with Service Workers. So it is like a transaction atomic, where you install everything or you install nothing. It's just one more point I want to highlight about Service Workers. Yeah. So when I showed the code last time in the app module, yeah. So it is installing the Service Worker config. It is installing the Service Worker script. This script comes from the configuration file here. This is the other configuration file we have. We have a bunch of fields, out of which I just want to highlight asset groups. This is what is caching the icons, index.html, manifest file for the installation, CSS, JavaScript. This is the application bundles. We'll come into this as well. So everything as far as the application skeleton is concerned, fonts, images, everything is going to come as part of the default configuration for a Service Worker. Going back to the deck one more time. Yeah, this is the Service Worker configuration. Asset groups is what we were looking at. App data, you could give a description to your version of the application. When you're installing a new version, it's possible you could say in few lines, what is the upgrade that you're doing? Is it bug fixes? What are the enhancements? Could talk about those in app data. And data groups is the important part. This is where the data itself could be cached. Yeah, we haven't really seen it in the demo, but this is the other part of the demo. Eric, hopefully I'm doing okay with the time. Let me know if it is
pretty well. You got another 15 minutes.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. All right. So let me then jump into data groups and quickly showcase. I have a use case here. Let me talk about this use case. Yeah, I mean, anybody who wants to play with this, you have this. But once you get to the slide deck, or you can make a note of this URL, you'll be able to clone this repo and play with this particular code sample. So what is this use case? Let me run through the application. Let me ensure the application is up and running on the other side. Yeah, it's running on port 8080. Let me go back to. It's a pretty straightforward small application, an imaginary web arcade online gaming system. So you have a show dice. It does a roll of a dice. You have few dummy games listed here. Click on one. You would see the details of the game, and you could add few comments. That's pretty much the functionality. Just have three pages. I have, if I go to this application, and if I show the service worker configuration for this, let me close this. In addition to asset groups that we have seen in the previous code sample, you also have data groups. We are caching everything that begins with prefixes with API. So if I look at fetch and XHR calls, you see the, and I'll go ahead and refresh this. Board games, this list of games comes from a particular service, and the URL has API in it. So let me go throttle offline again on this. I'll go ahead and refresh this. So you're not able to download the service worker configuration anymore. This is not supposed to be cached. Rest of the details, this application works as if there is no, even as if there is connectivity. It's supposed to even show the game details. I'm trying to see what's different about it. Let me empty cache and retry this. Yeah, something wrong with the game details. I will have a look. But primarily what we are looking at is, if you see, this API board games list is coming from service worker. The real service is not accessible because we have throttled it offline. This is the other aspect I wanted to highlight. You can even cache data with service workers. That is the data groups. There are few fields here. I wanted to highlight one more point here. When we talked about the application, application is installable. You have upgrades to it. You can version it and upgrade it. So if you see, it could be install mode, could be prefetch or lazy. What do I mean by that? I mean, if there are few scripts that are, if there are few scripts that are not down, I mean, in a typical application on page one, you don't really download that particular script. In that scenario, if it is lazy, only if you go to that page, it will cache it for you. Prefetch, of course, as the term says, it will get you all the scripts upfront so that your application is fully functional. That is the install mode. That's pretty much it. Asset groups is fairly straightforward, but data groups is slightly different. It is a little complex because you can't really version the services. Service versioning means completely a different thing. So how long would you be able to cache the data? I mean, if you're showing, imagine something cached this morning, and even tomorrow, if you see the same data, same responses, that actually defeats the purpose. So you would have to set timeout. There is a strategy, performance and freshness. This is an interesting aspect. So if you configure it for performance, your application will immediately load. It will get it from the cache. Only if the cache is not available, it will go to the network. And then when does the cache expire? Whenever you specify the max age. If you specify 24 hours in an example, next day it'll go to the network and get the data for you. Whereas on the freshness, it'll always go to the network first. If the network is not available, after a particular timeout, it gets it from the cache. So these are two strategies for data caching the API calls with service worker. Hope this makes sense. Moving on, I don't see any questions. Hopefully it's all making sense. Yeah,
we do have some questions. I'm not sure if you already read those in the chat because I was preparing the quiz questions, but there was one asked just a little bit ago by Akila. Is that how you say your name? Did you want to ask that yourself, or do you want me to ask it for you?
All
right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when would you use PWA versus just making a mobile app? Like using Ionic or something like that. Like, when would you use that versus using a PWA or
Yeah, that's a good question and a difficult question, because that's something we struggle with a lot of times as I do consulting. When customers ask the same question, it's not an easy yes or no answer, largely because we have seen a lot of applications, a lot of apps that pretty much do what a web app does. You don't really have native device features. They would still deploy it as an app for various reasons. Those are easy choices. You could just make them PWA, let user install it, take it from there. But on the other hand, when you have certain native features which are accessed through Ionic's plugin, which is not available with HTML5 API. I mean, if you're talking about geolocation, I think you can get the geolocation from, for example, HTML5 API, but rather there is something very native to the device and you need to access that, and it's not possible with a PWA. Those are the scenarios we should ideally go to an app. But there are also user experience questions. There are few applications that users are trained to go to an app store, download it and use it. In those scenarios, would you let user go to a web page and save it as a shortcut on the mobile device? So that's another question a lot of times, because of convenience and user training today, user behavior today, a lot of times people go with an app. Hope I'm answering that question.
Thank you for the answer, Keerti.
Yeah, all right. So moving on. Yeah, so we talked about this. I was showcasing how certain calls can be cached from service worker, and yeah, and then browser support. This is an important aspect, right? If you still care about Internet Explorer, I think bad luck. You can't really use service worker. I think a lot of people move to Edge. Even in my organization, I see a lot of applications that move to Edge, which underneath uses Chrome's V8. So we are good there. And there is a lot of adoption, except for legacy browsers for service workers. But if you're still interested, there are a few links I mentioned. This is from Mozilla org link. but you can use can-I-use.com is service worker ready. This is somebody's a link. Actually, it's pretty good. This person built it for us and gives us a lot of information about if the service worker is ready. But I use can-I-use.com quite a bit for many features, HTML5 features. We should be able to come to this site blindly and just specify what feature you're talking about. You're there. So Eric, if you don't mind, how many minutes more I have? I have one topic. If I go through in depth, I might need 10, 15 minutes, but if we don't have so much time, I'll just cover it high level.
We only have about 3 minutes, and I want to leave questions, like time for at least one question before the quiz.
Certainly. Okay. Then I will try to, at high level, cover this topic. So far, if you've seen the data calls that we have seen, the scripts, the images, everything that service worker has been able to cache for us are largely GET calls. But an application is not complete unless you have the create, update, delete, which is put, post, patch, delete operations on HTTP. So we haven't really covered that. Service worker, I've seen an issue again where in GitHub, they're asking for service worker to start supporting post calls as well. It could be useful, especially in GraphQL cases. But at this point, it's not really a solution to use service worker for rest of other than get the rest of the calls. So we could write custom code with some implementations like IndexedDB. What is IndexedDB? It is a client-side database. Typically, if you're saving something in the browser, you would do it in either a session storage or a local storage, which is simple key value pairs. If you try to store large amounts of data, it's not really a good idea in those spaces. Whereas IndexedDB lets you index it lets you organize data in terms of collections. You call them data stores, and then you could also, I'm probably getting that name wrong, but yeah, you have a way to group your data in the form of a table or a collection. And you could also create indexes so that you could retrieve data when you're storing good amounts of data into the browser. In a database kind of an implementation, you would need faster retrieval, which would need indexes, which is provided by the IndexedDB implementation. So imagine a scenario where a user has gone on offline. I was taking the example at the beginning. I was filling up a form, I submitted, and I went offline. So I could save that data into an IndexedDB. When I come back online, when the user comes back to the page, either pre-fill the data or say that whatever data last time you have submitted, can I post that data to the service and synchronize it? That is a kind of an implementation we can provide with IndexedDB. So yeah, so this is what, I mean, I've not really merged it with the service worker, but in case of put, post, delete, you could do an implementation with IndexedDB within the browser. You save the data into it, where it is, use it like a cache. I mean, I've taken an example where if you went offline, you do it, and then your application is still functional. Even if you're offline, your application is functional. You're able to create data. You're able to update and delete data. Imagine Twitter. You're still able to tweet. It has not gone online yet. When you're online, it would post it for you. So that kind of an implementation is possible with IndexedDB. It's high level about IndexedDB. Yeah, and these are quick steps. How do we do it? My code samples have all these things. If you're specifically interested, there is a particular service. I've encapsulated everything and put the code here. IDB storage access service. IDB stands for IndexedDB storage access service. You could see this code. If you're sticking to this particular code sample. And I mean, I've seen an opinion where IndexedDB implementations are little hard, and the native API provided by the browsers are little hard. So there are a lot of libraries that have come up. Dexy is a famous library that provides a good wrapper. It simplifies the API for us. Local forage is, it provides polyfill. Local forage is pretty good because it provides the polyfill. If your browser doesn't support IndexedDB, you could fall back to WebSQL and ultimately to the local storage, in fact. I'll give a moment for people to scan through this list. And finally, browser support at your leisure. Have a look at this. Yeah, and I mean, we talked about quite a few implementations here. What's not a good idea is a true transactional system, a banking system going offline. Obviously doesn't make sense. A lot of times it's a common sense thing, but just want to put it out there. These are for the kind of things we're talking about: adding comments, submitting a form, where user is not losing that experience. User doesn't end up with a page can't be displayed message. Application is still functional. It could come back to the server late. Yeah, that's the idea. I meant to say transactional. I think there's a typo there. Yeah, this is pretty much largely my content. I'm open for any Q&A comments.
Okay, we got one in the question in the Q&A feature from is it Deva Balan? Feel free to correct me. I'd like to say your name right. They say, will there be any security issue if we store it in IndexedDB?
If somebody, I mean, it's a similar scenario for local storage, I would assume. I mean, somebody can overtake local storage, overtake cookies. They might be able to, if somebody is able to overtake the browser session, they might be able to do it for the for IndexedDB as well. But that's a rare scenario because we depend on keys. For example, OAuth keys, SSO keys, those are stored either in cookies, session storage, local storage all the time. Yeah, so if that's okay, IndexedDB also is going to be okay. And if you're storing SSN in IndexedDB, probably that's a bad idea. Not probably, it is a bad idea. So, but yeah, as long as it's a user comment, why not?
Well said. All right, I don't see any other questions and we're almost out of time. Everybody give it up for Keerti. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic analysis of offline mode and PWA service workers IndexedDB. And I'm only sorry we didn't get to hear more about the IndexedDB part, but that was fantastic.